Hey, Carlos Lago with Edmunds here. That's a Ford Ranger Tremor. It's what Ford calls the most off-road ready Ranger you can get from your local Ford dealer. Now, what better way to measure that off-road capability than comparing it to a Toyota Tacoma TRD Pro, and that's the most off-road ready Tacoma you can get from your local Toyota dealer. These are both capable, comfortable, daily drivable, and most importantly, cool looking off-road pickup trucks. Now, we've already tested and evaluated the standard version of these trucks, both on and off-road. So in this video, we're going to talk about what makes these off-road specific trim levels special, the pros and cons of each, and which one ultimately might be worth your hard-earned money. Before we do, make sure to click like and subscribe. If you like videos like this one, also visit edmunds.com/sellmycar to get an instant cash offer on your car. What makes the Tremor the Tremor? Well, aside from sharing the name with an excellent movie franchise that you should watch, the first one's got Kevin Bacon in it. Second one's good too, but stop there. Aside from all that, it's an off-road package that costs about $4,300, and you can get it on the mid-level XLT or top-line Lariat Rangers, provided it's a four-door like this and with the 5-foot bed, obviously 4x4 too. It comes with Fox shocks all around, remote reservoirs in the rear, you get a small lift, a locking rear diff, and a couple other things we'll talk about later, like these 17-inch wheels and all-terrain tires. This specific one is a Lariat, you can tell because the badge right here, and it's got a couple other goodies on it too, like the tech package, upgraded stereo, trailer tow package, and a few other things that bring the as-tested price to about $47,000. Now, the super familiar and endlessly popular Tacoma. The TRD Pro is different than the Tremor in that it's its own trim level, so there's less flexibility with pricing. In order to get it, like this automatic one, you have to start at $48,000. Now, this truck also has a bunch of non-important accessories and doodads installed on it that bring the as-tested price to just above $50,000. As for the TRD Pro, it's like a rung above the TRD off-road, so you get all the hardware that truck comes with, like a locking rear diff and a couple other things. And the TRD Pro package, or the trim level, adds Fox shocks all around, remote reservoirs in the rear, a small lift, and a bunch of other cosmetic upgrades, which in my mind aren't that important anymore because you can no longer get the TRD Pro in Army Green. That's sad. But you can get that on the TRD off-road, and it costs less money. Really think about that. When it comes to demonstrating articulation and clearances, we like to use the Ziggurat of Integrity, but we couldn't get to it because of snow, so here's a rock, and we parked on it. Couple things to point out with the Tremor. Yes, that lift gives you more clearance throughout, both in ground clearance, approach, breakover, and departure angle versus the standard Ranger. If you check the gap on this rock here, we might not have actually made this happen with a normal Ranger. Now, other things that are specific to Tremor are these recovery hooks, which are nice. Little red accents here, always a nice touch. And also, if you look underneath, you'll see what appears to be a plastic body cladding right here, because it doesn't have TRD embossed on it, but it's actually steel, and I didn't find out until I hit it and hurt my hand. So it's really nice that you have steel protection under the truck. On the other hand, both of these trucks have plastic bumpers, or bumpers with lots of plastic on them and parking sensors on them. So if you do end up ignoring the warning signs of your steel protection, you'll probably end up facing a hefty bill if you touch those with rocks. That's about there. Yeah, and I'm gonna write R for Ranger. If we are anything, we are good scientists, engineers. Huzzah! Anyway, so as we get to the back wheel, what actually limited us from climbing up this rock further was the front end. We lost traction there, and that's actually a good stopping point because it shows us how much articulation we have out of this rear wheel. I'll use Edmunds' standard measuring device, Arnie, here to see that's about 1 1/3 Arnie's off the ground. We'll be sure to measure that again with the Tacoma later. Now that the wheel's all unloaded and stuff, we can also see what's happening back here. You get to see those remote reservoirs from Fox. Really cool to show off that branding. But more importantly, you can actually see the full-size spare and those meaty tread blocks, and that's a nice thing to have. As we get to the rear, you don't see a lot in the way of recovery hooks like you do in the front, and this bumper is still plastic as well, so same challenge as the front. But if you do need to get a recovery thing going on, you can use a trailer hitch and get something like this guy, which is definitely not heavy. I'm just weak. It's like a maraca. As you can see from the positioning on the tape, the Tacoma got further up the rock. Now, in this position, you can see its advantages with regard to clearance. Approach angle versus the Tremor is like 4 degrees more. Breakover is very similar. Departure angle is actually slightly worse, but we can take a look at that when we move around to the back. Now, up front here, the gaps here are a lot bigger than they were in the Ranger, and that means you're going to be less likely to bump into stuff, and that's good because these bumpers are still plastic. Now, underneath is the skid plate, and you can definitely tell it's a skid plate because it says TRD on it in big red letters. This is also aluminum and not steel like the Rangers, so it's lighter but more susceptible to damage. Ideally, or theoretically, it would be more expensive to replace too, just based on the price of aluminum versus steel. Let's take a look at the side. At the back, we definitely picked up a rear wheel, but the question is how high? It's about 1 Arnie off the ground. So in terms of articulation, this is better than the Ranger Tremor by 1/3 of an Arnie. Important stuff. Now, if you're wondering where the Fox Racing remote reservoir is at, it's actually at the bottom because that's where it's mounted. But the interesting thing to note about these shocks is they're mounted outside of the leaf springs, closer to the wheel. On the Ranger, they're inside of leaf springs. Also, full-size spare wheel and tire. So, cool stuff. As we get to the rear, it's the same story with recovery where you can use an accessory and the trailer hitch to solve those problems. Also, like the Ranger, it's plastic bumper with parking sensors, so be careful if you touch things. Also, you probably saw this guy and the side steps on the Ranger. If you care about off-road driving and clearances, don't get these accessories because these things are an easy way to introduce parts of the vehicle to the ground. So clearances and articulation generally go to the Tacoma, but it's the other story when it comes to powertrain. We love the turbo 2.3 liter Ford banger under the hood of this Ranger. It's pretty powerful, but also has significantly more torque than the Tacoma. Not only that, it's connected to a 10-speed automatic. Having all those gears gives this powertrain more opportunity to flex its muscle. So many gears, so many options. And that improves acceleration and fuel economy, at least in terms of EPA estimates. The Ranger also has a shorter first gear, and that means it overall has a better crawl ratio than the Tacoma. And that's further amplified by all that torque. Basically, this engine doesn't have to work as hard at low speeds. Not only that, it's a turbocharged engine, so it's not going to be as affected at altitude as a naturally aspirated engine. And if you want more power, you can get it as an accessory at your local Ford dealer. There's a lot to like here. Now the old familiar Toyota 3.5 liter V6. This engine is old, but it's far from underpowered. It still makes decent power and torque, although it certainly has less torque than that Ranger. Now, if you read all the comments below, you're probably going to hear something about Toyota reliability. That's all well and good. The real challenge with this powertrain is the 6-speed automatic. With fewer gears, you don't have as wide of a ratio spread, so predictably this truck is slower in a straight line and not as fuel efficient in terms of EPA estimates. It does have a numerically lower crawl ratio than the Ranger, so that means this engine's going to have to work a bit harder to move over objects at low speeds. You can get it with a 6-speed manual, so that's cool if you're into that kind of thing. On the other hand, you do have to live with the TRD exhaust that comes standard on the TRD Pro, and that thing just doesn't sound that good. It's further amplified by the fact that you only have 6 gears, so when you're on the freeway and you go to pass somebody, you make this big downshift and that exhaust sounds terrible, and it's just not a pleasant thing to drive on the freeway. All that said, this is still a package that gets the job done. Now we're going to do a little hill climb. Ahead of me is obviously a hill. Now we know both of these trucks can make it up this hill. We've already done it already. We're also going to climb up this hill in more challenging ways than necessary just to demonstrate all the tools and features at our disposal in each truck. So I'm going to start in 4 high with the rear diff open, and I'll engage features as we start driving up in both trucks. Now at the Ford, I have a couple things at my disposal. I of course have 4 high, I've got a locking rear diff. I also have a terrain management system that I will use to select, let's see, I got normal, grass, gravel, snow, mud ruts, and sand. Let's try mud ruts, and that'll work in 4 high. So I'm also going to choose a line that's not going to be the most efficient, to see what we need to make it up this hill. A lot of ruts in front of me, so perfect application to make it up. No problem. I don't have to use a lot of gas pedal. The power from that 4-cylinder is pretty strong. And I gotta say, there's actually quite a bit of grip in these tires as well. You can look at the sidewalls just to see, or the tread blocks to see just how beefy they are. Still haven't needed to engage the locking diff yet, but that'll probably change right about there. So let's stop, lock the diff, and resume. And no problems whatsoever. The computer software is going to be helping me out, but I can't really sense it, if I'm honest. I don't hear any ABS pulsing to, grab the front tires or anything. It's actually pretty smooth in application, although I would like to have a forward-facing camera on this truck as I crest the hill. That would make it a lot easier. While we're doing this, we may as well talk about general interior impressions as well. This is a pretty spacious interior and I have a lot of headroom. I definitely like the seating position in this truck more than I do in the Tacoma. I feel like I'm sitting at a more natural angle, and again, that headroom really helps as well. One thing I'll point out while we're driving is that I have 6 auxiliary switches on top of the dash for accessories if you want to install, and that's really nice. It comes as part of the Tremor package. So if you want to add things like a light or a winch, or lights or a winch, you can. That's really cool. Just know that the front bumper, I don't believe, actually has a winch provision, so you'd have to do some additional work there to make that happen. But nice that Ford is looking out for you from that perspective. So I'm turning around at the top of the hill now to come back down. And again, it's one of those situations where a front camera would be really appreciated. And on the way down, I'm gonna use the off-road cruise control, sort of low-speed cruise control that the Ranger comes with. I'm gonna go down here and hit this button, which is gonna engage trail control. That's what they call it. And then I use the cruise control to engage it. And I can start at 1 mile an hour and then increase the speed in half-mile-an-hour increments. And that should get me down the hill without trouble. Let's see how that works. You can hear the ABS, I presume, making that little grinding noise. Very subtle though, and very smooth in its application. Wow, this is going really slow for 4 high. Let me bump up the speed a little bit. 3 mile an hour. And this is doing a pretty good job, I gotta say. My foot's off the brake, just letting the system ride it out. While we're doing this, visibility is strong. I don't have a big hood bulge blocking my view, but I would like a little more interior storage, I guess. Let's bump it up to 5 miles an hour. That is really cool. That's really neat. Now, as we get to the next drop in elevation, I'm gonna turn off trail control, and we're gonna engage low range and see what the crawling is like on the way down the hill. See if I feel like I need to ride the brakes going down this steep hill. Let's put it in first gear. What's funny is you can tell that the shifter, this dash was definitely not designed for 10 speeds because you only have room for 6 gears, and then once you get up to 10, it has like an arrow that indicates. But we'll go down to first gear. That's just an interesting thing to point out, the age of this truck, or the age of that dash. So in first gear, in low range, diff locked, foot's hovering the brake pedal, but don't need to use it yet. Okay, needed to use it there a little bit, but gotta say, not on it as much as I thought I might need to be. Off the brake, crawling pretty good, getting to about 4 miles an hour. A lot of control downhill, nothing to be worried about on this hill. Again, this is not a super challenging hill, but just to show you the technology and attributes you have in this truck when you're climbing. Very quiet and smooth experience overall. Not a lot to complain about with how this thing goes up a hill. There's certainly a lot of capability in this drivetrain and in this truck overall from what we can see. Now we're gonna climb the same hill in the Tacoma, and I'm gonna do it the exact same way, starting out in 4 high with the rear diff not locked. The Tacoma has a couple off-road drive modes, but what's different about them versus the Ranger is that you have to be in 4 low to use them. So we'll do that on the way back down, I guess. Let's start climbing. I can already start out and say that the seating position in the Tacoma feels weird. My feet are higher than what I'm used to in most vehicles. What we understand is, of course, that your feet are like that because the body's higher, and that's what gives you that additional front clearance, but it does feel weird to some body styles, and that could be I don't know, fatiguing on a long drive. This TRD Pro also doesn't have the same level of grip in the tire. You can tell it just by looking at the tread blocks. They're not as meaty as the Rangers, but still we're making totally fine progress up this hill. In fact, the throttle control on this is really good. I haven't even needed to engage the rear diff yet. And what I don't like as I crest this hill, that the hood bulge is massive and I actually can't see over it as I'm coming up over the hill. But fortunately, there's a trail camera that lets me see the forward-facing view from the bumper, so I can just kind of ignore that hood bulge. What's a bummer about this forward-facing view is that the resolution isn't that great. So it's better than nothing, but it could be even better. I gotta say, I'm really impressed that considering the deficit in power, the deficit in tire, I climbed up this hill without needing to lock the rear diff. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Let's turn around at the top here. And thanks for that camera, I can actually see where the fence is. As we go on the way down, the only way to use the drive modes in the Tacoma is to switch to 4 low, so that's what I'll do now. Wait for that to engage. And then there are 2 things we can use. There is a low speed crawl control, just like the Ranger, and there are a couple different drive modes, but there are differences in the way that they work. Okay, 4 lows engaged, back into drive. So I'll start out with the multi-terrain select. I've got a couple options: mud and sand, loose rock, mogul, rock and dirt, and rock. So I think rock would be a good option for climbing up a hill. We didn't even need to engage it on the way up because this had the traction and capabilities to get up, which was honestly surprising considering the difference between these two. I'm gonna put it down in first gear and let the truck control itself first. It is gonna be going faster downhill because we don't have as much engine braking as we do in the Ranger, but not bad at all. Yeah, really easy to manage, no issues in this thing. And as I get to this crest here, I'm going to turn off the multi-terrain select and turn on crawl control. Now, crawl control is the low-speed cruise control. Instead of adjusting it by half-mile-an-hour increments, you basically have 5 different speeds: low, medium, and high, and 2 settings in between low and one setting between low and medium, one setting between medium and high. You get what I mean? And it's going to do the same job, where it's going to be automatically adjusting your speed with the brakes. You can probably already hear how much louder it is than the Rangers. That's not to say it feels clunkier in action, it just certainly sounds clunkier, and it gets the same job done. I can even turn it up a little bit. So if you can live with something that sounds like the Jason soundtrack, or like, you know, one of those throbbing bass lines from 80s synth retrowave music, this works. This works, and it's pretty cool too. I will say, as I'm coming down the hill, the glare on this screen blows out the forward-facing camera, so that could be a problem, especially when you want to use that camera. Turn the speed up, let it climb this hill, which is totally unneeded, but it's nice to know you have that safety net. Neither of these trucks have front locking differentials. We haven't found a place where we would benefit from those yet, but that's an important thing to point out as we talk about these trucks. That's all the cruise control. That's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool system. Crawl control has been deactivated. All right, we've reached the 3, 2, 1. All right, we've reached the end, and the question is, which one of these trucks is worth your hard-earned cash? And the answer isn't as simple as we would all hope it is, because it really depends on your priorities. So let's run through the pros and cons of each truck, starting with the Tacoma. The pros: off-road capability in terms of clearances and articulation are impossible to ignore. This thing has it all when it comes to those measurements and those capabilities. We also noticed that it was able to do basically everything the Ranger could do, if not more, even though it's deficient both in torque and gearing. So that's impressive too. The interior also boasts more storage overall. You also get a forward-facing camera system, and a lot of that stuff makes it for a really usable truck off-road. On-road is where a lot of the flaws creep in, specifically the powertrain. That 6-speed automatic was fine 5 years ago, but today it really comes up short. especially when you're commuting on the freeway. It's maddening listening to that exhaust. I don't like it. Also, cost. You have to spend a lot to get a TRD Pro, and you kind of wonder where all that money is going to outside of like the light up Pro on the headlights, which look cool, but I'd rather have an 8-speed or a 10-speed transmission, let's be honest. Ford Ranger Pros are kind of the opposite. Powertrain is robust and powerful and really easy to live with. It's great off-road and great on-road. Price, you can get all the best parts of the off-road performance in the Ranger for significantly less money than the Tacoma TRD Pro. That's really impressive too. 3, something we haven't really talked about in this video but bears pointing out is towing and hauling. The Ranger Tremor can tow and haul slightly more than the Tacoma TRD Pro. So that's important to you, that's worth caring about as well. And I almost forgot, the electronic drive off-road modes in the Ranger are smoother in application, although they don't seem to be any more or less functional than the Tacoma. It just feels nicer to use. And how can I forget the upfitter switches in the Ranger? That's a really nice addition for people who want to install their own accessories and want easy power to access them and turn them off and on without having to install like an aftermarket box somewhere. All really nice stuff. Now on the downsides, with the Ranger, the interior storage options aren't as nice as the Tacoma. Also, the fact that the rear seat only folds as one whole unit, not 60-40 split, is a big bummer when it comes to wanting to haul 3 people in cargo. We really wish that was a better setup. Overall though, the Ranger Tremor seems to be like an easier truck to live with day to day if you're just going to spend a lot of your time commuting and go off-road sometimes, whereas the Tacoma might be slightly better or if you prioritize off-road performance over everything else. I still think get a TRD off-road with Army Green and let the aftermarket do the rest. But hey, that's my money. So thanks for watching. If you like this video and want to see more of it, leave a like and a comment and a subscribe. And if you don't like it, hey, I'm sure you're going to comment anyway. Also, be sure to visit Edmunds.com for more about these trucks and others like them. And also visit Edmunds.com/sellmycar to get an instant cash offer on your car.